This clip is brought to you by SaveWithConrad.com.
Well, let's talk about what's happened most recently. This is the first Clash of the Champions after the sale of Jim Crockett Promotions to Turner Broadcasting and the subsequent change of the company name to World Championship Wrestling. Meltzer would write of this: I should point out this was the first time a TBS crew covered the show rather than a crew hired by Jim Crockett Promotions. There was a lot of finger pointing after the show because the production itself was subpar. Particularly, those fingers were pointed at director Tony Edwards.
That'd be Tommy Edwards, by the way.
Although some claim Edwards was a scapegoat for problems due to the lack of preparation, the lighting was awful, even worse than most of the syndicated shows. I didn't realize until after the show was over that they had any kind of a crowd in the building, as I figured the darkness was to hide the fact that they had a small crowd. When I found out the place was almost full, the lack of lighting made no sense. Talk to me a little bit about this production piece, because this is something that Tony Schiavone has talked about before. And of course, Eric Bischoff has talked about before. When you start using the Turner resources for your production, maybe they've been shooting hockey or baseball or basketball or football, but if they don't have any sort of depth of knowledge of professional wrestling, it's hard to anticipate where you should be and what you should shoot. And this perhaps is the first major show where something like that exists. Do I have that right?
Yeah, you got to have product knowledge no matter what you're doing. And you know, Tommy had been doing some studio stuff for us in Atlanta on Techwood. So when the TBS show was in the studio, big difference because they already had lighting. The lighting was set and all that stuff. But we found very quickly that even though many of the TV crew that from TBS that were shooting this show were even though they may be casual fans, they didn't have enough product knowledge because they'd never shot wrestling except in the studio. Different ballgame, doesn't even count. And so it was a tough transition in that regard. But Tommy did a good job. Tommy's now the producer of the late Sports Center on ESPN.
Oh, wow.
The one from LA. So it wasn't the fact that Tommy wasn't good, because he was. He just didn't have the product knowledge. And quite frankly, upon further review, I don't know who the hell stepped forward to help him. And that was another issue. So that was there was just bad karma there at that time, bad communications. Everybody was covering their ass. And what you find out is, you know, what I have grown to know over the years, being in an administrative end of pro wrestling, is that many of my peers don't save any money. So when they look like they're going to lose their job, or their job is in jeopardy, then consequently, they panic because they're not ready for it. They can't miss a check. And it's hard to believe that guys making six figures plus are living paycheck to paycheck. Is sad, but that's kind of where we were. Everybody knew that change was afloat. There was paranoia everywhere, insecurity everywhere. But, you know, not one person can be blamed for that. You know, you got to look at the TBS upper management and say, hey, Tommy, maybe we should have you do a show before this live TV show. Maybe we should have you do a run through. Maybe we should have you sit with somebody that's done it. So that didn't happen because everybody had their own little fiefdoms, their own little businesses, so to speak. And Crockett's crew have been doing TV forever. They're doing all the syndicated shows. So it just it was a rough transition, and if you had to pinpoint it down to one thing, Conrad, probably just a total lack of communication, just piss poor, I might say, communication within the whole crew, including myself. And the good thing about my deal was I didn't have anything to do with it because I was just simply an announcer. And so I just stood back from a distance and watched the chaos and the calamity and thinking that, well, it's going to get better. It did get better to some degree, but there was a lot of rough spots until we got to that better land.
Talk to me a little bit about, you know, why we didn't continue to try to use the Crockett people? Was this just a cost cutting measure where Turner thought, well, hell, I don't need production people. I run a fucking television network. I've got my own.
Yeah, I think so in essence. You know, and he had his own crew, and the crew that did our wrestling was the same crew that basically the same crew that did the Hawks.
Right.
So they're done a lot of sports. And I remember a lot of folks can remember at one time before CBS got a hold of it, Turner had SEC football,
which was a big deal.
And so on Saturdays they did SEC football. So they were used to doing big events, but they had experience in those events and they had product knowledge of football and the NBA, et cetera. So, but they didn't have it in wrestling. And I think it's a part of what we've seen over the years and still continue to see it at times is that people take for granted that pro wrestling is easy. It's a good guy versus a bad guy. I can produce this. I can direct this. It's really easy. It's just wrestling. Who the hell can't do wrestling? Identify the good guy, identify the bad guy, and move on. Well, there's a lot more nuances than that, as we all know. But the lack of respect for the genre in general kind of took a dump on the production. They went in thinking this is going to be easy, and it's not easy. As a matter of fact, it's more challenging, quite frankly, than any of the other two sports I've mentioned.
Let's talk about another thing they tried here. They experiment with the top-down camera angle, which obviously didn't catch on. Later, years later, we would see them try the referee camera. But the top-down camera, I've always kind of liked. And now, believe it or not, it's returned to TNT all these years later. Sometimes when there's a quote-unquote double-down spot and you've got two guys laid out, maybe they're trying to beat the count. Tony Khan likes that top-down camera, and I do too. What'd you think of the experiment, and why don't you think ultimately it caught on?
I think in the beginning, if you've ever been in that building in the UTC arena in Chattanooga, you would see how steep it is. It made the building look bigger. When there were people there, it made the house look like it was just jammed. So I think the building and the architecture of the building had something to do with that shot in the beginning. But Turner kept looking for something new. In other words, everybody that puts their hands on a project in a creative stature wants to add their own fingerprints to that. And they want something new, different, or something that hasn't been used in wrestling. So, and I think there was a little bit too much effort there to be different than to be better. So I don't know what the top, I don't have a problem with the top down camera, but to me, it's not a deal breaker, yay or nay.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.